Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I remember the exact moment my stomach dropped like a stone. It was a gray Tuesday evening, one of those nights where the sky just hangs low and heavy, and everything feels a little more tired than it should. I had just gotten home from a 14-hour shift, tossed my keys into the dish by the door, kicked off my boots, and grabbed the pile of mail that had been collecting for days on the kitchen counter. Most of it was the usual junk: supermarket coupons, credit card offers, a jury summons I intended to accidentally forget about, but then I saw it: my monthly statement from First Horizon Bank. I wasn't worried at first. I live pretty simply, you know? Mortgage, utilities, groceries, an occasional Amazon binge when I'm 3 beers deep on a Friday night. But when I tore it open and my eyes locked onto the balance, it felt like the goddamn earth tilted under my feet. $10,000. $10,000. I blinked at the number, thinking maybe I was looking at some kind of promotional offer, or a typo, or maybe my brain was short-circuiting from exhaustion. But no, it was real. And it wasn't just the total. As I flipped through the pages, my hands started to tremble because the charges were all over the place: luxury makeup, boutique clothing stores, a goddamn spa retreat 2 states away. There was even a receipt for a hotel suite downtown that cost more for one night than my monthly mortgage payment. It was like flipping through a stranger's life, and every line item punched me harder in the gut. At first, I thought maybe my card had been stolen. I tried to convince myself that someone had lifted my wallet, that this wasn't personal. But that fantasy died a fast death when I saw one particular charge. Jenny's Style Haven, a cutesy little boutique my sister Jenny practically lived in. She even dragged me there once on my birthday, claiming it was fun to expand my wardrobe horizons. I hated every second of it. Seeing that name on my bill was like getting slapped across the face. My heart thudded against my ribs as I yanked out my phone and called her. She picked up on the third ring, sounding breathless, like I'd interrupted something important. Maybe a goddamn shopping spree. "Hey, Nikki," she chirped, her voice so light and careless it made my skin crawl. I didn't even bother with small talk. "Jenny, did you use my credit card?" There was a tiny pause, barely half a second. But in that half second, I heard everything. I heard the guilt, the calculation, the decision to act like it was no big deal. "Oh, that." She laughed, like I had caught her sneaking a cookie before dinner. "Yeah, I borrowed it." "Chill out, you make way more money than me anyway." I swear to God, my vision went red for a second. "You borrowed it?" I hissed, clutching the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. $10,000, Jenny. That's not borrowing, that's robbing." She scoffed, and I could almost see her rolling her eyes on the other end. "You're so dramatic, Nick. You don't even miss that kind of money. Come on, don't be such a hard ass." That was the moment it stopped being about money for me. Right there. It was about respect. About trust. About all the times I had shown up for her, bailed her out, kept my mouth shut when she made one disaster after another. She wasn't just stealing cash, she was spitting on every favor, every second chance, every ounce of patience I had ever given her. And the worst part? She didn't even care. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down, the kitchen chair scraping hard against the tile. I could hear her laughing softly, like this was all some big hilarious misunderstanding. Like I was the asshole for getting upset. "You need to relax," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Go crack open a beer or something. You're not gonna even remember this in a week." Something inside me, something old and bitter and sharp, snapped. I realized, sitting there at my kitchen table with the sun setting outside and my sister's smug voice filling my ear, that she had never, not once, seen me as a real person. Just a resource. Just a wallet with legs. "You're gonna regret this," I said, and I meant it. I meant it down to the marrow of my bones. She laughed again, this high, breathy giggle that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "Whatever, Nick. Talk to you later." She hung up before I could say another word. I sat there for a long time after that, the phone dead in my hand, the credit card statement crumpled under my fist. Outside, the neighborhood kids were playing basketball in the cul-de-sac, their laughter sharp and bright against the cooling evening air. Life going on. Normal life. A life that, at that moment, felt like it belonged to somebody else. You ever have a moment like that? Where the betrayal cuts so deep, you don't even feel angry anymore, just hollow. Like someone reached inside you and scooped out everything that mattered? That's where I was, sitting there at my kitchen table, wondering what the hell I ever did to deserve this. And maybe, deep down, realizing that this wasn't about just this one moment. This had been building for years. I just hadn't wanted to see it, but I saw it now. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You can't go back. You can only move forward. And sometimes, moving forward means burning a few goddamn bridges. I didn't know exactly how yet, but one thing was certain. Jenny had crossed a line. And I wasn't about to just sit there and let her dance across it without consequences. Not this time. Not ever again. Because trust, once it's broken like that, doesn't just heal. It festers. It rots. It turns into something you can never quite scrape off your skin. And as I sat there, the streetlights blinking on one by one outside my window, I made a promise to myself. Jenny was going to learn, the hard way, that not everything in this life comes with a free pass. Not even for family. Especially not for family. And if she thought I was just going to roll over and let her walk away with my dignity tucked in her designer purse, she had another thing coming. Because I was done being the nice brother. I was done playing the fool. And soon, so was she. The next morning, I woke up with a weight in my chest that no amount of black coffee could shake off. My mind kept replaying that phone call with Jenny, like some sick joke stuck on a loop. Part of me, the stubborn, tired part that had spent a lifetime smoothing things over, wanted to pretend it had never happened, just toss the damn bill in the trash and move on. But the bigger part, the part of me that had been chewed up and spit out too many times, was screaming that enough was enough. And that part, for once in my life, was finally winning. Before I could even figure out my next move, the phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me to pick up. It was my mom, her voice dripping with forced cheeriness, the kind that instantly sets every nerve in your body on edge. "Hi, honey," she said, drawing the words out like they were made of molasses. "I heard about the little misunderstanding with your sister." Misunderstanding. That word hit me like a slap. Misunderstanding? I repeated, my voice already climbing. "She stole 10 grand from me, Mom. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft." There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line, like she couldn't believe I would use such an ugly word about her darling daughter. "Nicholas James Palmer," she said, and I flinched because she only used my full name when she was getting ready to lay on the guilt like frosting on a burnt cake. "You're her big brother. You're supposed to help her. She's family." I sat down heavily on the edge of my bed, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on my shoulders. "Being family doesn't mean I have to let her rob me blind, Mom," I said, but even as I spoke the words, I knew I was fighting a losing battle. I could already hear the wheels turning in her head, the ancient machinery of our family dynamic grinding back to life. "You make so much more money than she does," she said, switching tactics. "It's just money, Nick. She's going through a rough time." A rough time? Jenny had been going through a rough time since she was 15 and figured out that a pretty smile and a few well-placed tears could get her out of just about anything. College tuition she blew on a failed startup? Rough time. Rent money she spent on a spontaneous Vegas trip? Rough time. DUI arrest she begged me to bail her out of last year? Rough time. And every single time, it was me who picked up the pieces while she waltzed off to her next disaster. "If you turn your back on her now," my mother continued, her voice dropping to a grave whisper, "you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Family is all we have, Nick. Family is all we have." The sacred mantra of every dysfunctional household that would rather bleed you dry than face the truth. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you're asking me to let her get away with this. You're asking me to be okay with being treated like a goddamn ATM." "I'm asking you to be her brother," she said sharply, and for a moment, I could almost see her standing in her kitchen, cordless phone pressed to her ear, her other hand kneading the edge of the countertop the way she always did when she was getting emotional. "She looks up to you, you know." That line would have made me laugh if it hadn't made me sick. Jenny didn't look up to me. She looked at me at what she could take, what she could borrow without asking, what she could guilt me into giving her with those wide, innocent eyes she wore like armor. "She's not a child," I said. "She's 36 years old. She's responsible for her own mess." There was silence for a beat, then a heavy sigh. "If your father were here, he'd be so disappointed in you right now," she said, and that was the final bullet in the old Palmer family guilt revolver. Mention Dad, invoke the ghost of expectations I had never once managed to live up to, and hope it would break me like it always used to. Maybe once upon a time it would have. Maybe 5 years ago, even last year, I would have folded like a cheap suit and sent Jenny a check just to make the guilt go away. But sitting there, clutching my phone in a death grip, I realized I didn't feel guilty anymore. I felt furious. I felt betrayed. And under all of that, burning steady and bright like a second sun, I felt something even scarier. I felt free. I wasn't going to let this go. I couldn't. Not if I wanted to live with myself. "If your own family stole from you," I said, almost to myself, almost to the invisible audience I could feel gathering in the back of my mind, "would you forgive them, or finally draw the line?" Let me know in the comments, because I had no idea what to do next. I knew Mom wasn't done yet, though. She had one more card to play, and she dealt it with the precision of a surgeon, making the first cut. "You know Jenny's had a hard life, Nick. You had it easy. You always had the good grades, the scholarships, the promotions. She's been struggling just to keep her head above water." And there it was, the old wound, raw and festering, ripped wide open again. The idea that somehow my hard work had been luck. That my success was an accident, and Jenny's failures were just fate being cruel. As if I hadn't spent nights grinding out work while she partied. As if I hadn't clawed my way up through jobs that chewed me up and spat me out while she floated from one dream to the next. I ended the call before I could say something I couldn't take back. Sitting there, staring at the cracked screen of my old phone, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to stand there and take it this time. I wasn't going to let the guilt drown me again. I had a plan. It wasn't fully formed yet, just a whisper at the back of my mind, a flicker of an idea. But it was there. And this time, I was going to see it through. This time, Jenny was going to learn the hard way that blood may be thicker than water, but it sure as hell ain't thicker than respect. Not anymore. Not for me. Not for what she did. For the next few days, I played the part of the dutiful, forgiving older brother so perfectly that even I started to believe it sometimes. I answered Mom's calls with a warm voice, agreed to Sunday dinner without my usual hesitation, and even shot off a few text messages to Jenny that were short but polite, which in our family counted as a goddamn olive branch. I had learned a long time ago that sometimes the best way to get what you want is to let everyone believe you have surrendered, to smile while you sharpen the knife behind your back. It was a dangerous game to play, but I had reached the point where the danger felt more like a challenge than a risk. Mom and Dad were practically giddy, basking in the glow of their imagined victory, telling everyone who would listen that their son was finally learning to forgive, that family was healing, that everything was working out exactly as it should. I let them think it, let them pile on the praise with heavy hands and self-satisfied smiles, and all the while, under the surface, the real work was happening. I had reached out to my old buddy Chase, a guy I had known since high school who now worked private security jobs for the kind of people who made headlines when their marriages fell apart. If anyone knew how to dig up dirt and cover their tracks, it was Chase. We met at a dive bar on the edge of town, the kind of place that served whiskey strong enough to strip the enamel off your teeth and played old rock ballads so loud you had to shout just to be heard. I liked it because nobody asked questions, and even if they did, nobody cared enough to remember the answers the next day. Chase looked exactly the same as he had 15 years ago, lean, sharp-eyed, a smile that could mean trouble or salvation depending on which side of it you were standing. After 2 beers and a few pleasantries about our respective miserable lives, I laid it out for him. I told him about the card, about Jenny, about the guilt trip circus my parents were running out of their living room. He leaned back in his chair, took a long drag from his cigarette, and said, "So what's the play, man? You looking for revenge, or are you looking for justice?" It was a good question. The kind of question that stings because you know damn well the answer isn't clean. "I just want proof," I said after a long pause. "Proof that it wasn't some one-time screw-up. Proof that she's been doing this for years. I need them to see her for who she really is." He nodded slowly, the smoke curling around his head like a halo made by the devil himself. "I can help with that," he said, and just like that, the plan was in motion. Over the next week, Chase dug into Jenny's records like a man on a mission. He pulled bank statements, credit reports, social media posts she thought were private, all of it. He even found receipts from pawn shops where she had sold off stuff she borrowed from friends, things she later claimed had been stolen or accidentally lost. Piece by piece, the mask she wore so easily in front of our parents began to crack, and the real Jenny, reckless, selfish, cold, started to show through. Meanwhile, I kept up the act. I showed up to dinner with a bottle of wine, smiled through gritted teeth while my mother beamed across the table, and listened patiently while my father patted my back and told me how proud he was of the man I had become. It made my skin crawl, sitting there under their approving eyes, knowing full well that every word out of their mouths was built on a lie they desperately needed to believe. They needed me to be the good son. They needed Jenny to be the wayward daughter they could still save. They needed the whole broken, rotting structure of our family myth to stay standing, because if it crumbled, they would have to face the fact that they had built it wrong from the start. And Jenny, oh sweet Jenny, played her part even better than I did. She showed up in a new dress, flashing that smile that had gotten her out of so many speeding tickets and bad decisions, laughing a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, wrapping her arms around Mom and Dad like she was the prodigal daughter come home at last. She even hugged me, right there in the driveway where the whole neighborhood could see, and whispered, "Thanks for not being a dick about it," into my ear with that same syrupy sweetness that used to melt me when we were kids, and she needed someone to cover for her. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. I could see it in the way her eyes darted around the room when she thought nobody was looking. I could hear it in the too casual way she asked about my next business trip, about when I would be out of town next. There was a tightness to her that hadn't been there before, a crack in her composure that told me she was already plotting her next move. Because people like Jenny don't just stop. They don't wake up one morning and decide to be different. They adapt. They survive. And if you let them, they will gut you again and again without a second thought. I knew something was coming. I didn't know exactly what not yet, but the air around her buzzed with the promise of it, like the charged silence right before a storm tears the sky in half. And this time, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. This time, I was going to be ready. Because the thing about masks is, no matter how carefully you wear them, no matter how good you are at pretending, sooner or later they slip. And when they do, it's not pretty. It's not tragic. It's just the truth, ugly and raw and impossible to unsee. And Jenny was about to learn that no amount of charm, no amount of crocodile tears or whispered apologies was going to save her when that moment came. Not this time. Not with me. Not anymore. The day I decided to drop the bomb, it wasn't raining or storming like some poetic movie scene. It was just another bland Saturday, the kind where you can smell the neighbor's barbecue firing up 2 doors down and the air feels lazy and thick, pressing against your skin in a way that makes you want to do nothing but sit around and drink cheap beer. My parents had insisted I come over for lunch, claiming it was just a casual family get-together, but I knew damn well it was another stage performance where we would all pretend nothing was wrong while the resentment simmered just beneath the surface. I sat in my truck in their driveway for a few minutes before going inside, the fraud report folded neatly in a plain manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. It was thicker than I had expected, full of records Chase had pulled together with almost surgical precision, every fraudulent charge tied to Jenny's social security number, every accidental purchase traced back to her own accounts. It wasn't just the 10 grand on my card either, it was dozens of little betrayals stretching back years, a paper trail of manipulation and entitlement that even my parents wouldn't be able to explain away. When I finally walked through the front door, Mom was in the kitchen humming some old song under her breath, the smell of roast beef and baked potatoes filling the house with a warmth that felt almost cruel. Dad was setting the table, his movements slow and deliberate, while Jenny lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up when she saw me, flashed that brilliant, hollow smile, and said, "Hey, Nikki. You made it." For a split second, I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me harder than I had expected. Part of me, the battered part that still wanted to be the good son, the forgiving brother, whispered that I could still back out, could still shove the envelope under my jacket and eat my damn roast beef like nothing had ever happened. But that part had been running the show for too long, and today was the day it died. "Family meeting," I said, dropping my keys on the counter with a clatter that made everyone jump. "Living room." "Now." Mom blinked at me, confused. Dad straightened up slowly, wariness creeping into his eyes. Jenny's smile faltered just for a second, just long enough for me to catch it before she plastered it back into place. Once we were all seated, I pulled the envelope out of my jacket and placed it on the coffee table between us like a dealer laying down a royal flush. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air in the room thickened, every second stretching out like chewing gum under a hot sun. "I'm gonna make this real simple," I said, my voice calm and flat, the way it gets when you're too angry to even yell. "Jenny stole from me. $10,000. And when I confronted her, she laughed it off like it was nothing. "But it's not just this one time. It's been happening for years. And I can prove it." Jenny's face paled, the blood draining from her cheeks so fast it was like someone had flipped a switch. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out, just a strangled little gasp. I slid the envelope across the table to Dad, who looked at it like it might explode. He opened it slowly, pulling out the neatly organized pages, his eyes scanning the first few lines before widening in horror. Mom leaned over to look too, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "This is ridiculous," Jenny said suddenly, her voice too loud, too shrill. This is fake. You're setting me up. You're trying to ruin my life because you're jealous." Jealous. The word was so absurd that for a moment, all I could do was laugh, a harsh, humorless bark that echoed off the walls. "Jealous?" I repeated, standing up so fast my chair toppled over behind me. "Jealous of what, Jenny? Of the mountain of debt you're drowning in? Of the way you use everyone around you until there's nothing left to take? You don't understand." She cried, turning to our parents like they were a jury she could still sway if she just cried hard enough. I didn't have a choice. Nick's always had everything handed to him, and I had to fight for scraps. Dad was flipping through the pages now, his face getting redder by the second. I could see it happening in real time, the dawning realization that the daughter he had spent his life defending wasn't some innocent little bird who just needed a little extra help. She was a goddamn predator, and she had been feeding off us all for years. "You lied to us," Mom whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "All those times you said you were just borrowing, just getting back on your feet. I needed help," Jenny shouted, standing up and knocking over her wine glass, red liquid spreading like blood across the white tablecloth. "I didn't think you'd notice. Nick has so much, he doesn't even miss it." And there it was, the real Jenny, raw and unfiltered, the entitled brat who thought the world owed her something just because she existed. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, loud and slow and merciless. Finally, Dad set the papers down with trembling hands, looked at me with eyes that seemed 100 years old, and said, "Nick, what do you want to do?" And I smiled then, a real smile, cold and sharp as broken glass. "Don't worry," I said. "I've already taken care of it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a second envelope, this one stamped with the official seal of the bank's fraud investigation unit. As I laid it down on the table, I watched Jenny's last shred of bravado crumble. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and for the first time in my life, I saw her for what she really was, small, scared, and completely out of moves. Mom gasped when she saw the words printed at the top, "Notice of pending investigation." Dad sat back in his chair, his face pale as chalk, staring at the document like it was a death sentence. And maybe, in a way, it was. The days after I dropped the fraud report bomb were some of the strangest of my life, a weird mixture of grim satisfaction and hollow, aching dread that clung to me no matter how many times I told myself it was all necessary. At first, it was just quiet, a dead silence from my parents' house, the kind that feels heavier than shouting and lasts a whole lot longer. I didn't hear a word from Jenny either, which didn't surprise me, because when the walls close in, she's always been the type to bolt or play the victim, sometimes both in the same afternoon. But the silence broke sooner than I expected, and when it did, it wasn't Jenny who came storming back into my life first. It was my mother, voice shaking with that brittle edge she always got when she knew she was losing but was too damn stubborn to admit it. She called me early in the morning, before the sun was even up, her voice cracking under the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations and pleas. "Nick," she started, without so much as a hello, "you need to fix this." I sat there in my kitchen, coffee steaming in my hand, staring out at the empty street as if it could give me the patience I knew I didn't have. "Fix what, Mom?" I said, keeping my voice steady, calm, cold enough to make even myself shiver a little. "Fix the fact that Jenny's been stealing from everyone who ever trusted her? Fix the fact that she's finally facing consequences like a goddamn adult? She's your sister," Mom said, like that was supposed to mean something magical, like it was supposed to erase the ink on all those police forms and investigation papers. "You can call the bank, tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can make this go away before it ruins her life." For a second, I closed my eyes, feeling the old reflex kick in, that deep-rooted urge to make things better, to sweep up the broken pieces before anyone got hurt. But I shoved it down hard. "I'm not calling anyone," I said, each word dropping like a stone into the widening gulf between us. She did this. She made this choice. And now she's going to live with it. There was a long, broken silence on the line, and when Mom finally spoke again, she sounded smaller than I ever remembered her sounding before. "If your father were still alive," she whispered, "he'd be heartbroken." I almost laughed at that, because if Dad were still alive, maybe none of this would have happened in the first place. Maybe Jenny wouldn't have grown up thinking the world owed her something just because she could charm the hell out of people. Maybe I wouldn't have spent the last 20 years cleaning up messes I never made. But it didn't matter. He wasn't here, and this was the wreckage we were left with. 2 days later, the formal charges were filed. Nothing serious, not yet, mostly warnings and demands for restitution, but it was enough to put Jenny in a tailspin. Chase sent me a text with a screenshot of her mugshot, not from an arrest exactly, but from the initial booking after she was called down to answer the fraud complaints. She looked like hell, mascara streaked down her cheeks, a blank, hollow stare in her eyes that made her look more lost than guilty. I stared at that photo for a long time, feeling something heavy and ugly twist inside my chest. Because here's the thing no one tells you: when you finally stand up to the people who use you, it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like standing alone on a smoking battlefield while everyone you loved looks at you like you're the enemy. Mom called again the next night, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Dad, silent on the other line, just breathing heavy like every word was cutting into him. They begged me, pleaded with me, said Jenny was falling apart, said she had been seeing some guy who drained her bank accounts and left her with nothing, said she hadn't even told them how bad it had gotten because she was ashamed. Ashamed. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Jenny had never seemed ashamed of anything before. For the first time, I started to wonder if maybe I hadn't seen the whole picture. Maybe she wasn't just irresponsible. Maybe she was desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. They lie. They steal. They hurt the people they love because survival drowns out everything else. But even knowing that, even feeling that tiny sliver of sympathy dig into my gut, I still couldn't bring myself to regret what I'd done. Because desperation didn't excuse betrayal. Desperation didn't erase the years she spent treating my life, my trust, my love like they were things she could just pick up and drop whenever it suited her. And if I bent now, if I bailed her out again, what would that teach her? That no matter how bad she screwed up, she could cry and beg and manipulate her way out of it? Not this time. Not anymore. I knew the audience out there, the invisible jury in my head made up of every person who had ever been screwed over by someone they loved, would be split right down the middle. Some would say I had gone too far, that family forgives, that money is just money and blood is thicker than anything. Others would nod and say it was about damn time someone held her accountable. I didn't know which side I would have been on if I were sitting on the outside looking in. Hell, I didn't even know which side I was on now. All I knew was that the ground under my feet was scorched and smoking, and there was no going back. Jenny was facing the fallout of her choices, and so was I. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure which one of us had really lost more. It was a week after the charges were filed when I got the call that would blow the last pieces of my illusion to hell. I had been trying and failing to lose myself in work, poring over spreadsheets that blurred into nonsense and phone calls that I barely remembered making when Mom's number popped up on my screen again. For a few seconds, I just stared at it, the way you might stare at a live grenade, wondering if you should run or just let it go off in your hands. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was different this time. No anger, no desperate pleading, just this hollow, defeated tone that made my stomach twist before she even got the words out. She asked if I could come over, said there were things I needed to know, things they should have told me a long time ago but didn't because they were trying to protect Jenny and maybe, in their own way, trying to protect me too. Against every screaming instinct telling me to stay away, to let them all drown in the mess they made, I grabbed my keys and drove over. The house felt different the second I walked in, quieter somehow, smaller. The smell of roast beef and home-cooked comfort was gone, replaced by the sharp, sterile scent of lemon cleaner and something heavier underneath, something like grief. Dad was sitting in his usual chair by the window, staring out at the street with a blank look on his face, while Mom sat at the dining table, her hands wringing a worn dish towel into knots. They didn't waste time. They didn't circle around it with fake smiles and half-truths the way they usually did. Maybe they were just too tired. Maybe they finally realized the time for pretending had passed them by. Mom started talking, her voice shaking at first, then gaining strength the deeper she went. Jenny hadn't just made a few bad choices. She hadn't just had a rough patch. For years, almost a decade, if the timeline Mom laid out was right, Jenny had been drowning in debt. Not little debts either. Credit cards maxed out to the limit, payday loans with interest rates so high it made your eyes water, personal loans from shady lenders who didn't exactly send polite reminders when you missed a payment. It had started small, the way these things always do, with a missed credit card payment here, a late rent check there, little white lies she spun so easily they barely sounded like lies at all. And every time she slipped a little deeper into the hole, Mom and Dad had been there with their checkbooks and their hollow reassurances, patching the cracks and smoothing over the disaster while Jenny smiled and promised that this time, she really meant it when she said she would do better. But she didn't, Mom whispered, her eyes glassy with tears she didn't bother wiping away. She never did. I sat there, feeling like the floor was shifting under me, trying to reconcile the version of Jenny I had built in my mind with the broken, desperate woman my parents were describing. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand why they hadn't told me, why they had kept enabling her self-destruction while letting me believe that all I needed to do was be a better brother, a better son, and everything would work itself out. Another part of me already knew the answer. They hadn't told me because they were ashamed. They hadn't told me because they still believed, even after all the lies, that they could save her if they just tried hard enough. And now here we were, knee-deep in the wreckage they had spent years pretending didn't exist, and they were finally admitting that the house was on fire and had been for a long, long time. Dad spoke up for the first time, his voice rough and broken in a way I had never heard before. "She came to us a few months ago," he said, not looking at me, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the living room window. "Said she needed help. Said if she didn't get $20,000 by the end of the month, some people were going to come after her." "People?" I repeated, my voice cracking. He nodded slowly. "Bad people." She was scared, Nick. Really scared. I sat back, my mind racing. $20,000. No wonder she had hit my card. No wonder she had gotten so reckless, so desperate. She wasn't just being careless, she was trying to keep her head above water while the sharks were already circling. And suddenly it all clicked together in my mind. The spa charges, the boutique shopping sprees, the hotel stays. She wasn't living it up. She was laundering the money, trying to make it look legitimate, trying to hide the withdrawals, maybe even planning to run if things got bad enough. And we had all been her marks. I was just the last ATM she thought she could squeeze dry before the whole thing came crashing down around her. I felt sick. I felt furious. I felt like someone had taken my heart in their fist and squeezed until it crumbled into dust. For a long time, nobody said anything. Mom cried quietly into her dish towel. Dad just sat there, staring into the distance like he could still see a version of his daughter that didn't exist anymore. And me? I sat there wondering if maybe, just maybe, I had made everything worse by dragging the truth into the light. Because if I hadn't pushed, if I hadn't pulled the thread, maybe the whole thing would have held together a little longer. Maybe they could have kept believing in the lie for a little while more. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. It had been falling apart long before I ever knew about it. And something in Mom's voice when she finally looked at me and said, "There's more, Nick," told me that the worst wasn't even over yet. Not by a long shot. I drove home from my parents' house that night feeling like I was piloting someone else's body, every turn of the steering wheel mechanical, every mile stretching out in front of me like an endless, cracked ribbon. The confession they had dumped on me, raw and heavy, echoed in my skull louder than the engine noise, and no matter how many windows I rolled down or how much cold night air I sucked into my lungs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had cracked in a way that wasn't going to heal. By the time I pulled into my driveway and killed the headlights, the only thing I knew for certain was that everything I thought I understood about my family, about loyalty, about love, about forgiveness, was built on a rotting foundation that had been sinking for years. The memories came at me hard and fast once I shut the door behind me, the house too quiet, the dark pressing against the windows like an accusation. I saw myself as a kid again, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting in the back seat of Dad's old station wagon while Jenny wailed and screamed in the front seat because Mom wouldn't buy her the shoes she wanted. I remembered how Dad had finally caved, pulling into the mall parking lot while muttering under his breath that it was easier than listening to her carry on all the way home. I remembered how they bought her the shoes and a necklace and an ice cream cone, and how I had sat there with my hands folded in my lap, silent and invisible because good boys don't make scenes and good boys don't ask for anything. It was always that way, Looking back on it now with adult eyes, Jenny throwing tantrums and making messes and getting rescued, while I learned how to clean up quietly, how to apologize for things I hadn't done just to keep the peace. If Jenny crashed the car, it was my job to help her figure out how to cover it up before Dad found out. If Jenny blew her allowance on makeup or boys or God knows what else, it was my wallet she raided when she needed gas money to get home. And when she failed classes or dropped out of another job or ghosted another landlord, it was me who got the phone call, me who was expected to swoop in and fix it all without ever making her feel bad. I realized, sitting there alone in the dark, that it had never really been about money at all. Money was just the currency Jenny dealt in, the thing she used to measure how much she could take without losing the love and loyalty she believed was owed to her by birthright. What it had always been about, what it was still about even now with legal charges and bank statements stacked like tombstones between us, was attention, power, validation. And maybe, and this was the part that hurt the most, maybe it wasn't even her fault. Maybe when you raise a person to believe that love is unconditional no matter what damage they cause, when you teach them that tears can erase consequences and anger can bend reality, you don't end up with a bad seed. You end up with exactly what you planted. Maybe Jenny wasn't the villain after all. Maybe we all were. When I finally went back to my parents' house the following weekend, it wasn't because I wanted to. It wasn't because I thought we could fix any of this. It was because I needed answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask yet. Mom looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of a week, her shoulders hunched as she picked at a plate of untouched food. Dad's hair looked grayer, his face gaunt and pinched, as if the truth had been eating away at him long before it ever reached the surface. We didn't waste time on pleasantries. You knew, I said, not accusing, just stating a fact as plain as the cracked linoleum beneath our feet. You knew she was using people. You knew she was drowning, and you still kept throwing her life preservers that she had no intention of holding onto. Dad rubbed his face like he could scrub away the shame clinging to him. She was our daughter, he said hoarsely. What were we supposed to do? Turn our backs on her? I leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on me, the heavy legacy of parents sacrificing everything for their children, even when the child was doing everything in their power to destroy herself. You didn't help her, I said, my voice low but hard enough to cut glass. You crippled her. You taught her that no matter how much she screwed up, someone would always be there to clean up the mess. Mom flinched like I had slapped her. We were just trying to protect her, she whispered. Protect her from what? I demanded. From reality? From herself? You didn't protect her. You enabled her. There was a long, raw silence between us, the kind that feels too big to ever fill with words. We thought she would outgrow it, Dad finally said, his voice barely more than a breath. We thought, if we just loved her enough, she'd figure it out. And maybe that was the saddest thing of all, not that they had failed, but that they had believed love alone was enough to fix something so fundamentally broken. There was a part of me, sitting there staring at the people who had raised me, that wanted to let it go, to forgive them the way they had forgiven Jenny so many times. But another part of me, the scarred and bloody part that had spent a lifetime cleaning up after someone else's mistakes, knew it wasn't that simple. Because love isn't supposed to be unconditional when it means sacrificing your soul to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. I left that night with more questions than answers, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked to my truck, the stars overhead sharp and uncaring. As I pulled out of the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was still lurking just beyond the horizon, something that would make everything I had uncovered so far look like the opening act of a much crueler show. And deep down, I knew that whatever was coming next, none of us, not me, not my parents, and certainly not Jenny, was ready for it. It's funny how victory can sometimes feel like standing alone in a burning house, clutching a trophy made of ash and wondering when exactly everything stopped being worth saving. Sitting here now, looking back on it all, I sometimes wonder if I ever had a chance to win in the first place, or if it was always just a slow, inevitable march toward the moment when everything that mattered would slip through my fingers. They say time heals all wounds, but whoever came up with that line never had to sit across from their own mother at a Thanksgiving table and feel the ice-cold wall that no amount of turkey or polite conversation could chip away. It has been nearly a year since the day I walked into my parents' living room and laid the truth bare, ripping off the bandage they had wrapped so tightly around our family that it had started to suffocate us all. In the months that followed, Jenny spiraled in a way that even I hadn't seen coming. The legal trouble didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. The more the authorities dug, the more they uncovered. Unpaid loans, false statements, sketchy side deals with people who didn't take kindly to being lied to. The last I heard, she was living in a cramped apartment 2 cities over, scraping by on temp work and the dwindling goodwill of friends who hadn't yet realized they were her next target. I haven't seen her since the night she screamed at me over the phone, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs as she accused me of destroying her life, of ruining her chances at redemption, of betraying the only real bond she had left. I listened in silence until she finally hung up, leaving behind a silence so deep it rang in my ears for hours afterward. I thought, stupidly, that maybe once the dust settled, we could start again, that maybe there was a version of us still buried under all the wreckage. But the calls stopped coming, the texts dried up, and eventually, even the anger faded into nothingness, leaving only the kind of absence that feels heavier than presence ever did. My parents never forgave me either, not really. They didn't say it outright. We're too polite for that, too good at dancing around the truth in careful circles, but the distance grew between us like a crack in the foundation you pretend not to see until the whole house collapses. We still meet for holidays, birthdays, the obligatory family rituals that now feel more like courtroom proceedings than celebrations. We exchange gifts, we smile for photographs, but there's a hollowness in their eyes when they look at me, a quiet judgment that no amount of good intentions can erase. Sometimes, when I catch Mom watching me from across the room, I can almost hear what she's thinking. If only you had let it go, if only you had forgiven her one more time, if only you had been the bigger person. Maybe we could have kept the dream alive a little longer. I wonder if she knows that I think the same thing sometimes, late at night when the house is too quiet and the loneliness wraps around my throat like a noose. I got my money back, in the end. Chase helped me push the case just far enough that the bank covered most of the damages, and Jenny was forced into a payment plan for the remainder, though I doubt she'll ever pay it off. On paper, it's a win. I stood my ground, defended my boundaries, refused to be the doormat I had been my whole life. People who hear the story from the outside, people who don't know the tangled mess underneath it all, always tell me I did the right thing, that sometimes you have to choose your own sanity over toxic loyalty. But the thing about right and wrong is, it's a hell of a lot messier when you're the one standing in the ruins afterward. There are days when I sit in this empty house, surrounded by the things I earned with hard work and sleepless nights, and I wonder if any of it was worth the cost. What good is a paid-off mortgage if the people who used to fill it with noise and laughter now speak to you in clipped, careful sentences? What good is financial security if you can't even pick up the phone and call your own sister on her birthday without wondering if she would even answer? I think about Jenny sometimes, where she's sleeping, whether she's still fighting to stay afloat, whether she ever thinks about me with anything but hatred. I wonder if she ever tells herself a different version of the story, one where she's the wounded hero and I'm the villain who turned his back when she needed him most. Maybe in her mind, that's exactly what happened. Maybe in some twisted way, it's even true. And the truth is, I don't know anymore if I did the right thing. Maybe standing up for myself meant abandoning her when she finally hit bottom. Maybe saving myself meant letting her drown alone. Maybe it was never about justice or revenge or doing what was right. Maybe it was just about choosing the kind of pain I could live with. I stare out the window as the sun dips behind the houses across the street, casting long shadows over the pavement, And I realized that there are no easy answers, no neat endings where everyone hugs and cries and forgives. There is only the choice you make and the silence that follows after. So I ask myself again, the same question that has haunted me since the day I decided to pull the trigger on everything we once called family. Did I do the right thing? Or did I just destroy what little family I had left?